July 12, 1943, 0830 hours, Prokhorovka, Soviet Union. SS Oberscharführer Ernst Barkmann, 26 years old, tank commander in 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, sits in the commander's cupola of his Tiger water tank, scanning the horizon through binoculars. Ahead, across a wheat field perhaps 3 kilometers wide, Soviet tanks, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. T-34 medium tanks, KV-1 heavy tanks, moving in waves toward Barkmann's position. Barkmann has commanded a Tiger tank for 18 months, fighting in North Africa, then transferred to the Eastern Front for Operation Citadel. The Tiger is the most powerful tank in the world, 88mm main gun that can penetrate any Soviet tank at 2,000 meters. Frontal armor, 100-meter thick, immune to most Soviet anti-tank weapons. Reputation so fearsome that Soviet tankers often retreat when Tigers appear. Barkmann's Tiger has destroyed 17 Soviet tanks in the past week. Today, he'll add more to that count, or today, he'll die. Because what's approaching isn't a normal Soviet attack. It's a mass charge, 850 tanks converging on a 3-square-mile battlefield. The largest tank battle in military history. And for the next 12 hours, Barkmann will fight in what survivors will call a steel hell. Tank-on-tank combat at ranges so close that shells pass through one tank and hit another behind it. By evening, approximately 400 tanks will be destroyed. German Tigers, Panthers, and Panzer IVs burning alongside Soviet T-34s and KV-1s. The battlefield will be littered with wrecked vehicles, dead crews, and the wreckage of Hitler's last hope for victory in the East. This is Prokhorovka, the graveyard of the Panzers, the battle that broke the Wehrmacht's offensive capability, and the moment when Germany lost any chance of winning World War II. To understand Prokhorovka, we need to understand Operation Citadel, Germany's last major strategic offensive on the Eastern Front. By July 1943, Germany's situation on the Eastern Front is deteriorating. 1942 defeats. Battle of Stalingrad, November 1942, February 1943. 6th Army destroyed, 300,000 German casualties. Soviet winter counteroffensive. Germans driven back hundreds of miles, spring 1943. Soviet forces control initiative. German forces stabilize defensive lines, but cannot advance. Germany needs a victory to restore Wehrmacht prestige and stop Soviet momentum. Hitler's solution. Operation Citadel, a massive offensive targeting the Kursk salient. The Kursk salient. Soviet forces hold a bulging salient around the city of Kursk, extending 150 miles into German-held territory. German forces hold positions north and south of the salient. Hitler's plan? Attack from north, Army Group Center, and south, Army Group South, simultaneously. Encircle Soviet forces in the salient. Destroy trapped Soviet armies. Regain initiative on Eastern Front. German forces committed. 900,000 soldiers, 2,700 tanks and assault guns, including 200 Tigers, 200 Panthers, 2,000 aircraft, Germany's best divisions, Großdeutschland Division, 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, 3rd SS Panzer Division, Totenkopf. This is the largest concentration of German armor ever assembled. Hitler believes overwhelming force will break Soviet defenses. But Hitler doesn't know that the Soviets have been preparing for this attack for months. Soviet defenses. Soviet intelligence has identified German preparations. They know Operation Citadel is coming. Marshal Georgy Zhukov convinces Stalin to prepare defensive positions, rather than attack first. Let the Germans attack our defenses. Let them exhaust themselves against prepared positions. Then we counterattack when they're weakened. Soviet preparations. 6 defensive belts, stretching 100-plus miles deep, 400,000 mines laid, 20,000-plus anti-tank guns, 3,000-plus artillery pieces, 100,000 soldiers, 300 tanks, held in reserve for counterattack. The Soviets are ready. Operation Citadel begins July 5, 1943. Operation Citadel begins. German forces attack from north and south simultaneously. Southern Thrust, Army Group South. 2. SS Panzer Corps, commanded by SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser, spearheads the attack. The corps consists of 3 S Panzer divisions. 1st S Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. 2nd S Panzer Division, Das Reich. Barkmann's Division, 3rd S Panzer Division, Totenkopf. Total strength, 390 tanks, 100,000 soldiers. These are elite units, volunteers, extensively trained, equipped with the best German armor, Tigers, Panthers, upgraded Panzer IVs. Initial success, July 5 to 11. German forces penetrate Soviet defenses. Progress is slower than planned. Soviet defensive belts exact heavy toll, but Germans advance 20 to 30 miles toward Kursk. Soviet casualties are enormous, 100,000 plus in first week, but Soviet reserves remain intact, and Soviet commanders are preparing counterattack. July 11th, German reconnaissance reports massive Soviet tank formations assembling near Prokhorovka, a small town 50 miles southeast of Kursk. Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, commanded by General Pavel Rotmistrov, is concentrating at Prokhorovka. Strength, 850 tanks and self-propelled guns. Rotmistrov has orders from Stalin. Stop the S Panzer Corps, whatever the cost. Rotmistrov's plan is desperate but bold. The Germans have superior tanks, Tigers that can kill our T-34s at 2,000 meters. But Tigers need distance to use their advantage. So, we close the distance. We charge directly at them. At 500 meters or closer, our 76mm guns can penetrate Tigers. Yes, we'll take terrible casualties closing that distance. But if we don't stop them here, they reach Kursk. So we charge. It's a plan that will cost thousands of Soviet tankers their lives, but it will work. The collision at Prokhorovka, July 12, 1943, 0830 hours. The morning begins with Soviet artillery bombardment, 600 guns firing on German positions for 15 minutes. Then, silence. Through the smoke and dust, German tank commanders see Soviet tanks advancing. Not in organized formations, not with tactical finesse, just hundreds of tanks charging directly toward German positions at maximum speed. It's a mass assault, Soviet tank doctrine at its most brutal. Soviet tank tactics at Prokhorovka, standard Soviet tank tactics. Advance in waves, use terrain for cover. Engage at optimal range, 800-1,000 meters for T-34s. Prokhorovka tactics, charge directly at German positions, close to point-blank range, 200-500 meters, as quickly as possible. Accept massive casualties to negate German range advantage. Rotmistrov knows this will cost 30-50% of his tanks. But he also knows that if his tanks reach close range, they can kill Tigers. German response, Barkmann and other German tank commanders open fire at maximum range, 2,000 meters. The Tiger's 88mm gun is devastating at this range. First shot, hit, Soviet T-34 explodes 1,800 meters away. Second shot, hit, another T-34 brews up. Third shot, hit. Barkmann's loader, feeding 88mm rounds from storage racks, works frantically. The Tiger fires every 6 to 7 seconds, limited by how fast the loader can handle 45-pound shells. Around Barkmann, other Tigers are firing similarly, each destroying 2-3 Soviet tanks per minute. The advancing Soviet tanks are being massacred, but they keep coming. Soviet tanker perspective. Lieutenant Anatoly Kozlov commands a T-34 in the 29th Tank Corps. His orders: advance to contact, engage Germans at closest possible range. Kozlov's T-34 advances at 35 Mach, faster than Tigers can traverse their turrets. At 100 meters, German shell hits the T-34 next to Kozlov's. It explodes, turret flying off. At 200 meters, another T-34 hit, brewing up immediately. At 900 meters, Kozlov's tank hit. Shell penetrates frontal armor, kills driver and bow gunner. But the tank is still mobile. Kozlov continues advancing with reduced crew. At 600 meters, close enough to engage. Kozlov's gunner fires at a Panzer IV, hit, German tank disabled. At 400 meters, Kozlov's tank is hit again, this time the engine. Tank stops, burning. Kozlov and surviving crew bail out. Of the 15 tanks in Kozlov's company that began the charge, 12 are destroyed or disabled, but the 3 survivors reached close range and killed 2 German tanks. This exchange ratio, 5 Soviet tanks lost for every German tank killed, is catastrophic for the Soviets. But it's acceptable because Soviets have more tanks. Germany cannot afford to lose 100 tanks at Prokhorovka. The Soviet Union can afford to lose 300 tanks because they're stopping the German offensive. 12 hours of steel on steel. As Soviet tanks close range, the battle degenerates into chaos. 0900-1200 hours. Close-range tank combat. By 0930 hours, Soviet tanks have closed to 200-500 meters, the range where T-34s can penetrate German armor. Tank combat at this range is brutal. Penetrating hits at close range are catastrophic. When an armor-piercing shell penetrates a tank, it creates spalling, metal fragments from the armor interior flying through crew compartment at high velocity. Secondary fires, fuel or ammunition ignites, crew casualties. Anyone in the shell's path is killed or wounded. Tanks hit at close range rarely survive. They burn immediately, brewing up in tanker slang. Maneuver is limited. The battlefield, a 3-square-mile area of wheat fields, is now crowded with 850 tanks maneuvering. Tanks can't maneuver freely without risking collision or exposing flanks to enemy fire. Some tanks collide. Soviet T-34 rams a Panzer IV, both tanks disabled. Visibility is terrible. Smoke from burning tanks, dust from movement, gun smoke, all reduce visibility to a few hundred meters. Tank commanders can barely see enemy tanks before they're in gun range. Infantry support collapses. Normally, tanks operate with infantry support. Infantry suppress anti-tank weapons and defend tanks against close assault. But at Prokhorovka, the tank combat is so intense that infantry cannot keep up. Tanks fight alone, without infantry support, vulnerable to anti-tank teams, but moving too fast for infantry to matter. Artillery continues firing. Both German and Soviet artillery fire throughout the battle, sometimes hitting their own tanks because identification is impossible in the smoke and chaos. Barkman's Tiger survives through skill and luck. By 1,000 hours, Barkman's Tiger has destroyed 8 Soviet tanks. But the Tiger has been hit 3 times. First hit, Soviet 76mm shell strikes frontal armor, doesn't penetrate, but damages optics. Second hit, shell strikes turret side, penetrates but doesn't injure crew, damages traverse mechanism. Third hit, shell strikes engine deck, starts small fire. Extinguished by crew, the Tiger is damaged but operational. Barkman continues fighting, targeting Soviet tanks at 300-400 meters, using the Tiger's superior armor to survive return fire. By 1,200 hours, Barkman has destroyed 12 Soviet tanks. But ammunition is running low. The Tiger carries only 92 rounds, and Barkman has fired 65. 1,200-1,500 hours, German counterattack stalls. The U.S. Panzer Corps attempted to use Prokhorovka as a breakthrough point, capture the town, then exploit toward Kursk. But the Soviet mass tank attack has stopped the German advance. German tanks are fighting defensively, killing Soviet tanks but unable to advance because Soviet tanks keep coming. By 1,400 hours, the battlefield is littered with burning wrecks. Approximately 200 tanks destroyed, 150 Soviet, 50 German. But Soviet reserves continue arriving. Rotmistrov commits his second echelon, another 200 tanks. The Germans have no reserves. 1,500-2,000 hours. German withdrawal begins. At 1530 hours, USS Panzer Corps Commander Paul Hauser recognizes the battle is unwinnable. His forces have destroyed 300-plus Soviet tanks, but Soviets keep attacking. German losses, 81-100 tanks destroyed or disabled. More importantly, German offensive momentum is broken. The advance toward Kursk has stopped. Hauser orders withdrawal. German forces retreat to defensive positions, abandoning the offensive. By 2,000 hours, the Battle of Prokhorovka ends. The graveyard of panzers, the battlefield after Prokhorovka, is apocalyptic. 400-plus destroyed or disabled tanks scattered across 3 square miles. Thousands of dead tankers, burned alive in their vehicles, killed by penetrating shells, or shot while bailing out. The wheat fields are blackened by fires, churned to mud by tank tracks, cratered by artillery. Final losses at Prokhorovka, estimates vary. Soviet forces, 300-400 tanks destroyed or disabled, 5,000, 8,000 casualties, killed, wounded. German forces, 80-100 tanks destroyed or disabled, 500, 1,000 casualties. Why the discrepancy? Soviet tactics, charging directly at German positions, resulted in catastrophic Soviet tank losses. By exchange ratio, the Germans won the battle, killing 3 to 4 Soviet tanks for every German tank lost. But strategically, the Soviets won. German offensive stopped. Operation Citadel failed to break through Soviet defenses. German armor losses unsustainable. Germany couldn't replace 100 lost tanks quickly. Production was only 300 tanks per month for entire German military. Soviet reserves remain. Despite massive losses, Soviet tank reserves were still available for counteroffensives. Operation Citadel canceled. On July 13th, one day after Prokhorovka, Hitler canceled Operation Citadel. The reasons? Western allies landed in Sicily, July 10th. Hitler needed to transfer forces to Italy. Operation Citadel failed to achieve breakthrough. German forces penetrated Soviet defenses but couldn't encircle Soviet armies. German casualties unsustainable. Operation Citadel cost Germany 170,000 casualties and 760 tanks in 8 days. Hitler's decision ended Germany's offensive capability on the Eastern Front permanently. From July 1943 onward, Germany fought defensively in the east, retreating slowly toward Germany's borders, losing ground every month. Barkmann survived Prokhorovka. His Tiger, damaged but operational, withdrew with the 2 SS Panzer Corps. Barkmann continued fighting on the Eastern Front until late 1904, then transferred to the Western Front. He survived the war, surrendered to American forces in May 1945, and was released from POW camp in 1946. Barkmann returned to Germany, worked as a salesman, and lived until 2009, age 92. In a 2004 interview, Barkmann described Prokhorovka. "We destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks. We killed thousands of Soviet tankers. By any tactical measure, we won the battle, but we lost the campaign. We couldn't afford to lose 100 tanks. Germany was running out of tanks. The Soviets could afford to lose 300 tanks. They had thousands more. After Prokhorovka, we knew the war was lost. We'd fight for 2 more years, but we were just delaying the inevitable. The Wehrmacht was broken at Prokhorovka. The turning point, Prokhorovka, and Operation Citadel more broadly, marked the definitive turning point of the Eastern Front. Before Kursk, Germany could launch strategic offensives. German forces advanced, albeit with difficulty, when they attacked. Wehrmacht morale remained high. Soldiers believed Germany could still win. After Kursk, Germany could only fight defensively. Every German operation after Kursk was a retreat, counterattack, or defensive stand. Wehrmacht morale declined. Soldiers knew they were losing, but fought on from discipline, fear, or desperation. Soviet offensives accelerate. Immediately after Kursk, Soviet forces launched counteroffensives along the entire Eastern Front. Operation Rumyantsev, August 1943. Soviet forces recapture Kharkov, major Ukrainian city. Lower Dnieper offensive, August-December 1943. Soviet forces advance 300 miles, liberate Kiev. 1904 offensives. Operation Bagration, June 1904, destroys Army Group Center, killing 400,000 German soldiers, Germany's worst defeat. 1945. Soviet forces advance into Germany, capture Berlin, end the war. This cascade of Soviet victories began at Kursk. Why did Prokhorovka matter specifically? Prokhorovka wasn't the only battle of Operation Citadel, but it was the moment when German offensive capability visibly shattered. The psychological impact on German tankers was enormous. Before Prokhorovka, German tankers believed Tigers and Panthers made them invincible. After Prokhorovka, German tankers knew that even superior technology couldn't overcome numerical disadvantage and enemy willingness to accept casualties. Modern analysis. Military historians debate Prokhorovka's exact casualty figures. Soviet sources initially inflated German losses for propaganda, while German sources minimized their own losses. Modern consensus. Soviet losses, 350 tanks destroyed. German losses, 8,100 tanks destroyed. Soviet tactical defeat, but strategic victory. The lesson? Tactical excellence cannot compensate for strategic disadvantage. Germany had better tanks, better trained crews, better tactics. But the Soviet Union had more tanks, more crews, more industrial capacity. In a war of attrition, numbers win. July 12, 1943. 12 hours, one field, 850 tanks, 400 destroyed, thousands dead. Prokhorovka was the largest tank battle in history and the graveyard of Hitler's last Eastern offensive. The Germans killed more Soviet tanks than they lost, but the Soviets stopped the German advance, and that was enough. After Prokhorovka, Germany never launched another strategic offensive in the east. The Wehrmacht, bleeding from 1,000 cuts, retreated slowly toward Berlin. 2 years later, Soviet tanks would roll through Berlin's streets. The road to that victory began at Prokhorovka. These stories of desperate charges, technological mismatch, and the brutal mathematics of attrition deserve to be remembered. Subscribe so they never fade into history. Next time, one tiger, one day, 14 tanks destroyed. The ambush that stopped a British division and made one tank commander a legend.